the great bastion of Europe. It is not the stone in these walls that define their strength, but the souls of those who defend them, said István Dobó, the captain of Eger Castle, as he sought to instill courage in his soldiers. This quote is taken from Géza Gárdonyi's historical novel The Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, which describes the siege of Eger Castle in 1552. During the siege, 1,800 soldiers and a few hundred townspeople had to confront an Ottoman army of some 40,000 soldiers. The scenes from and heroes of that month-long battle are known to almost all Hungarians. The steadfast courage of István Dobó, the ingenuity of the protagonist Lieutenant Bornemissza, and most especially the unwavering determination of the women of Eger, who threw stones and poured hot pitch on the Turks ascending the castle walls. This was how the Turks' attack on Eger Castle was halted. For 100 years, Hungarian children grew up reading this story, and in 2005, Gárdonyi's book was voted the best Hungarian novel of all time. While some may debate its literary merits, the book serves as a faithful reflection of Hungarians' ideal image of themselves, as a people who can overcome insurmountable odds, fighting against and at times even triumphing over an enemy far stronger than they. It was during the anti-Ottoman wars that Hungarians truly learned what it was to fight against powers greater than theirs. Despite 2 centuries of conflict, the Ottoman Empire was unable to subjugate Hungary and continue its expansion into Europe. How was the expansion of the Ottoman Empire halted? Was Hungary truly the great bastion of Europe? And what price did Hungarians have to pay for this? Castle Wars. After 1541, Hungary was divided into 3 sections. The western and northern parts belonging to the Kingdom of Hungary under Ferdinand Habsburg, the eastern part ruled by John Sigismund in Transylvania, and the central part, known as Ottoman Hungary, falling under Turkish rule. As the leader of the Islamic world, the Sultan held the title of Padishah. His empire-building plans were motivated by the desire to spread what he believed to be the true faith of Islam. His main goal was always the conquest of a major Christian center referred to as a Golden Apple. Prior to 1453, it was Constantinople, followed by Buda, and after 1526, Vienna. However, following unsuccessful attempts to conquer Vienna in both 1529 and 1532, Sultan Suleiman changed his strategy and sought instead to consolidate and expand his rule in Hungary. Following their success at Buda and Szeged in 1541, the Turkish armies continued the conquest and in 1543 took Siklós, Pécs, Szexárd, Székesfehérvár, Esztergom and Vác. In 1552, yet more areas were conquered, with their capture of Drégé, Széchenyi, Temesvár, Arad and Szolnok, until finally the combined Turkish forces were defeated by the defenders of Eger. Szigetvar. In 1566, during Suleiman's final campaign, his army of 50,000 men arrived at Szigetvar. The castle was defended by Miklós Zrínyi, the Ban of Croatia, with 2,000 Hungarian, Croatian and German soldiers, and the same number of townspeople. Although Suleiman offered Zrínyi all of Croatia if he surrendered, Zrínyi remained steadfast in refusal. During the month-long siege, the Turks drained the water surrounding the castle and, following a prolonged battle, successfully took the old town. The horrors of the battle were illustrated by the fact that the Ottomans impaled all of their Christian prisoners, and in response, the speared heads of 300 Turkish prisoners appeared on the castle walls. With just 800 men remaining, Zrínyi repelled several attacks until the Turkish mortarmen finally succeeded in blowing up the external walls of the castle. The few hundred soldiers who had been driven back into the inner fortress found themselves without ammunition or water, but Zrínyi refused to surrender. He stripped off his armor, donned a ceremonial dress, stuffed his pockets with gold for his burial, and charged out of the castle with a handful of men. The self-sacrifice of the borderland soldiers and the courage of István Dobó and the people of Eger were fueled by faith and patriotism. This is further attested to by Miklós Zrínyi's plea for aid, which he penned before the siege. Above all, we aim to serve the good Lord, then His Holy Imperial and Royal Majesty, and with faith, steadfastness, and serenity of countenance, we shall also serve Christianity and this sweet nation of ours, which is plunged into utter destruction. We shall defend it with our blood, and if fate would have it so, risk our very heads. Their heroic perseverance was not entirely in vain. The aged Suleiman did not live to celebrate his triumph, dying in his tent on the second-to-last day of the siege. The great conqueror, who had defeated the Hungarians at Mohács, captured Buda and now also Szigetvar, died a mere 80 miles west of the site of his glorious victory at Mohács. In other words, he could not fully subdue Hungary even after 40 years. His successor, Selim II, had to accept this fact. The peace treaty of Adrianople, signed in 1568, put an end to the castle wars and made the division of the country permanent. The Kingdom of Hungary. After 1526, Hungary as a country was not shown on most maps of Europe. Instead, the northern and western regions of the Carpathian Basin were depicted as parts of the Habsburg Empire. Nonetheless, the Kingdom of Hungary still existed, just in a diminished capacity. The part of the country that remained covered an area of 110,000 square kilometers, which was still larger than the territory of present-day Hungary. Henceforth, until 1918, it would be a Habsburg monarch who'd sit on the Hungarian throne, a span of almost 400 years. Nevertheless, the Kingdom of Hungary would never become fully integrated into the Habsburg Empire. Apart from a few brief periods, the country's legislation remained the responsibility of the Hungarian parliament, and the Hungarian nobility kept its role in local administration. Until 1687, Parliament retained its right to elect the king, and new monarchs had to issue coronation charters pledging to abide by the laws of the land and to respect the privileges of Hungary's estates. However, these rights were largely symbolic, and the monarch wielded executive power through the Privy Council and the Imperial War Council, which rarely had Hungarian members. Even the Hungarian governmental bodies, the Chancellery and the Chamber, were merged into imperial ones for easier governance. This meant that the Habsburgs prioritized the interests of the empire above those of Hungary, even in the wars against the Ottomans, which caused much dissatisfaction amongst the Hungarians. The siege of Szigetvar is a good example. A royal army of 50,000 soldiers stationed at Győr were ordered to continue safeguarding the road to Vienna instead of aiding those defending Szigetvar's castle. Due to the system of fortifications along its borders, Ferdinand I and his successors saw the Kingdom of Hungary primarily as a battlefield and a buffer zone, ideal for defending the Habsburg Empire. For Hungarians, however, the Habsburgs' rule was essential, as the country's own revenues could not cover the costs of its defense. Regular aid from the empire was crucial for Hungary to maintain its fortifications and to ensure the survival of the remaining parts of the kingdom. The Ban of Croatia, Tamás Nádasdy, reminded his sovereign of the mutually beneficial nature of their relationship when he wrote, If His Royal Majesty does not provide resources for this country from those of his other countries, then it is certain that this nation will fall, leading to the loss of His Majesty's other lands. The capital. Despite their non-native origins, Hungary's previous kings, including the Anjous, Jagiellonians, and Sigismund of Luxembourg, were not regarded by their people as foreigners. Even if they ruled other lands, such as Bohemia or Poland, simultaneously, these monarchs held court in their Hungarian capital. The Habsburgs, however, always deemed their Hungarian royal status as secondary to their German royal or Habsburg imperial one, and therefore Hungarians regarded them as not Hungarians, but Germans. After Ferdinand I left Hungary and moved to Vienna in 1528, no royal court would reside in Hungary ever again. At this point, Buda, along with Székesfehérvár, the coronation city, and Esztergom, the traditional seat of the Catholic Church, were all in Ottoman hands. Therefore, the country needed a new capital. This role was filled by Pozsony, present-day Bratislava, which was closer to the imperial seat at Vienna and safe from Turkish invasion. Hungary's parliament would assemble there, and for an extended period, it was also home to both the Hungarian Chancellery and the Hungarian Chamber, which dealt with economic affairs. Interestingly, the spire of the Catholic Church of St. Martin in Pozsony is capped not by the standard cross, but by the Holy Crown. Indeed, until 1830, it remained the site where all but 2 Hungarian monarchs, a total of 11 Habsburg kings, were crowned. Ottoman Hungary. The Ottoman authorities established their own system of border fortresses, administration, and tax collection. However, unlike the Balkan territories, Ottoman Hungary was never fully integrated into the empire, even after 150 years of occupation. Hungarian officials managed to influence the region's affairs from afar, and Hungarian landlords could still collect taxes from the occupied territories. The region's inhabitants retained their language and Christian faith. Even the Reformation began to spread there. Agricultural market towns maintained much of their self-governance, often by bribing Turkish officials. The Ottoman pashas in the conquered territories corresponded in Hungarian with Hungarian officials, and even with the Habsburgs. Notably, one of the pashas of Buda asked that Emperor Maximilian write to him in Hungarian rather than Latin. Nevertheless, Ottoman rule did stall the development of the occupied territories. Serfs in regions on the periphery were forced to pay taxes to both sides, and were subject to frequent looting and raids by both Turkish and Hungarian fortress troops, even during peacetime. The purpose of these raids was to take hostages from both sides who could be ransomed to supplement the meager pay of fortress troops. The Ottomans were notorious for abducting the poor and selling them in Oriental slave markets, as well as turning Christian children into the devout Muslim warriors called Janissaries. The damage done to medieval buildings and works of art cannot be overstated. The basilicas of Esztergom and Székesfehérvár, together with the royal tombs, as well as the royal palaces of Visegrad and Buda, were destroyed. Medieval treasures from occupied territories, such as the relics of St. Stephen and the invaluable library of King Matyás, were all looted. The Turkish buildings, mosques, and minarets that were left in their places were of little compensation, excepting the Turkish baths built at the time, which established Buda's spa culture that is still thriving today. The Turks also introduced the habit of smoking and drinking coffee into Hungarian culture. Reformation and Catholic Revival. The 16th century heralded the Reformation era, and the influence of Protestantism spread rapidly throughout Hungary. The Lutheran movement found a following mainly in northern Hungary and amongst the German townspeople, whilst it was the Calvinist movement, known in Hungary as the Reformed Church, that gained popularity with the Hungarian nobility. Preachers from German and Dutch universities were dedicated to spreading their beliefs, which had a profound impact on Hungarian culture. There was a proliferation of printing presses, books, and reformed colleges, the most notable of which were the colleges in Sárospatak and Pápa, founded in 1531, and Debrecen, founded in 1538. The speed of this cultural change is aptly reflected in the life of that towering figure of Hungarian Protestantism, Ferenc Dávid, in Transylvania. He began his career as a Catholic priest, then became a Lutheran pastor, and soon thereafter a Reformed bishop. Ultimately, he died in prison where he was incarcerated for his Unitarian beliefs. The Catholic revival began in Hungary in the early 17th century, following the Council of Trent. Péter Pázmány, the Archbishop of Esztergom, headed the movement with his sermons, treatises, and outstanding organizational skills. In addition to setting up several schools, he also founded the University of Nagy-Szombat in 1635, and was instrumental in ensuring that, by the end of the century, the number of Catholics exceeded that of Protestants. Despite several heated religious disputes that occasionally led to violence and persecution, the competition for souls had a positive impact on cultural development. In the words of Péter Pázmány, the battle was fought not with a sword but with a pen, not with blood but with ink. Economy and society. Initially, Hungary's economy thrived irrespective of the political climate of the era. Whilst an influx of cheap South American precious metals into Europe had a negative impact on demand for gold and silver from Hungary, the country's agricultural production increased to supply food for the growing population of the Habsburg Empire. Huge cattle herds from the Great Hungarian Plains were sold to Italy and Austria, and the export of grain was also significant. During the 17th century, the winemaking region of Tokaj began to play an increasingly important role in Hungary's economy, largely due to exports to Poland. This economic boom benefited not only the landed nobility, but also the wealthy townsfolk of market towns and the vine-growing peasantry. Economic prosperity was cut short in 1591 by a 15-year war with the Ottomans. The cost of provisioning the imperial army and violent acts committed by imperial and Ottoman troops alike imposed an extraordinary burden on the people of towns and villages. During this period, the numbers of taxable households in the affected counties fell by 70%, causing entire towns to fall into poverty and settlements to become depopulated. Nor did the situation improve in the 17th century. The Ottoman campaigns of the 1660s, the anti-Habsburg activities of the Transylvanian princes and Hungarian estates, as well as the brutalities of the imperial army, made production difficult and often impossible. The poet and general. In wartime, muses are often silent. Not so in Hungary. It was in this era that Bálint Balassi, the greatest Hungarian poet of the 16th century, thrived. A womanizer who wrote love poems and religious verse, he was also a soldier in the borderlands and was killed by a cannonball at the siege of Esztergom. Then there was the great-grandson of Miklós Zrínyi, the hero of Szigetvar, who, besides writing military treatises, penned a magnificent Baroque epic chronicling his great-grandfather's heroic deeds, entitled The Siege of Sziget. I seek fame not with my pen alone, but with my terrifying champion's sword," he wrote in the final lines of the epic poem. Zrínyi was no ordinary fighter. As the empire's first Hungarian general, his victories propelled him to recognition across Europe as the future leader of a war against the Ottomans. Nevertheless, much to Hungarians' disappointment, the emperor passed him over and made peace with the Turks instead. The greatest Hungarian of the century died in a boar hunt in 1664. Many still suspect that the emperor had him killed. The liberation of Hungary. Hungary was finally liberated from Ottoman rule by an international coalition. The Allied Christian armies, led by Charles of Lorraine, recaptured Buda in 1686, and in 1687 were victorious at Nagyharsany near Mohács. Over the years that followed, Hungary's border fortresses were reclaimed one by one. In a decisive victory, Eugene of Savoy finally defeated the Ottomans at Zenta. The peace treaty signed at Karlóca in 1699 left only the Temeskus region in Turkish hands. Though Hungary was liberated, over a decade of war had left the country a relative wasteland. Whilst the western half of Europe was experiencing unprecedented economic and cultural development, Hungary had been summarily robbed and bled dry as it awaited the arrival of the 18th century.